Today I will use watercolor and rubbing alcohol to paint a koi fish. For this project, I'm using watercolor paper. This is Master's Touch watercolor paper from Hobby Lobby. I've got a couple paintbrushes. I have a little cap of rubbing alcohol. This happens to be 91% rubbing alcohol, but you could use the lower one. I think it's 75%. That works just as well. Doesn't really matter. I also have a pencil, some watercolor paints, and I will be ready to go. The first thing I want to do with my pencil is I want to just sketch out a koi fish. And to do that, I'm going to use a curved line that's kind of diagonally located on my paper here. Notice I'm using a square paper. I believe this is maybe 5 by 5 inches, but it doesn't matter what size you use. I'm adding kind of a hook to that line for the front part of the fish. And then I'm going to make a little fin here that's kind of coming out on the top. And then I'm going to add the tail here on the back. And I want it to kind of curve around as well to be the back tail of the fish. I want to go ahead and add some fins on the side of the fish as well. We'll do one there. There's one kind of hiding behind the top fin. And then I've got a couple here towards the front on either side. I'm going to go ahead and make the bottom of this fin too, so you can tell it's on the top of the fish. I'll throw the eyes on towards the front here on either side. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a couple of spots on the fish as well. The nice part about the spots is that it doesn't really matter how many you put or where you put them. Every fish is different. So I'm just going to throw a couple different ones on here. It's almost like putting spots on a cow, just adding them throughout the fish. And that is really it for the drawing. I'm not getting too fancy here, throwing a couple lines. Time to paint. Okay, when painting, I am just applying some wet paint to the dry paper. I am using some Holbein watercolor paint, and I'm only going to use 2 colors on the background. Right now, I am using a Prussian blue. I love this blue because it's very bright. It's a very vivid color and nice and dark and rich too. And then I'm also using Veridian green, which I almost never use. It's like a phthalo Veridian green. It's a staining color. Both of these colors are staining colors. They're very dark and rich and vibrant. And so I thought they would be fun to use. Now I'm getting a section wet, as you can see, and I'm even dropping in extra color while that section is wet. It's very important to have wet paper, wet section when you're working with the rubbing alcohol. So I'm getting a certain section of my paper wet with color, dropping in extra color, and then I'm using a different brush to apply the rubbing alcohol. And I'm just getting it wet and I'm just tapping the picture, and you can see the effect right away. It just kind of takes out color in that section. So that's why I was definitely putting a lot of rich color on first, because this lightens the color quite a bit. And depending how much rubbing alcohol you have on your brush, depends on how large the spots are. You can kind of see they tend to grow a bit, so I kind of put them in little clusters, trying to make some that are larger, some that are smaller. Now I'm going to go ahead and continue adding some color to my picture, continuing straight away after I have already done the rubbing alcohol in my wet areas. And I'm basically going to add more wet areas so that I can add more rubbing alcohol. And I can even go back into some of the original areas and make it even darker in spots. I try not to go back over the areas that have rubbing alcohol yet, unless they're dry. So I'm going to leave those alone. All right, I'm being very careful. I'm doing negative painting around my fish, trying to make sure that my paint does not go in that area. And then I am continuing to go back and forth between my Prussian blue and my Veridian green to fill in the space around my koi fish. You can add extra water if you want, just to make it nice and juicy and to get all of that painted in. Notice I'm using a round brush. A round brush is nice because you can get a wider section if you need to, or you can get more of the detail as well. I'm just filling in all around my fish here with some color, trying to drop extra color in with my watercolor paint until my whole area is complete. Now, I taped mine down, as you can see, so that my paper is not curling or rippling while I am using my watercolor paint. And now that I've got this whole bottom section filled in, I'm dropping a little bit of extra color here and there, and then I'm going to go ahead and start adding in the rubbing alcohol. And I'm just doing the little drops wherever I have the desire so that I can get little bubble-like effects in the water. Here I'm adding it in this section, just dropping it. You can kind of see it work. It's really fun to watch. It just kind of makes the paint go away in those areas, kind of pushes it out. So you can do as many or as few bubbles as you would like. You can also experiment with dropping it on super wet areas versus just barely wet areas. It has kind of a different impact on those. And then now that some of my areas have dried a little bit, I'm just kind of touching them up. So maybe I'm tracing around where the alcohol went so that it looks like an actual bubble. Or if there's maybe a little bit too much light, you can kind of go back in and add a little more dark. Notice that as I add rubbing alcohol to the second layer, I can add another round of dots and bubbles that way as well. So you could just kind of keep on layering and adding on and playing around with this effect as much as you want. I find it kind of fun just to play with and see what I can get, what kind of different shapes or different designs I can get in this watery background. Another thing that you could play around with is adding lily pads. Maybe you could do some of the rubbing alcohol as lily pads and go back in with like green on top of those areas. Or you could draw lily pads in on another one of these and then do the water around the lily pads as well. But I thought to just keep it simple, we would just do fish and water. Now, I have to wait for my background to dry before painting the fish. So you can see that my water is dry now. And now I'm going to go in to my fish and color in the spots. And I really wanted to go with the bright orange spots. I know that the koi fish are sometimes just black and white or gray. But the orange is just what calls me. And of course, the orange and the blue are complementary colors. So that means that the orange will stand out more next to the blue colors. So I went ahead and did some orange spots and fins here to make sure that it really pops. Now I am just going to use a black liner brush to add some black details to this, but another thing that you could have done too is just use a Sharpie, like a thin Sharpie or a thick Sharpie, to do the lines and then to add some black designs or details as well. But either way, it's fun just to kind of add some little detail elements here on the fish swimming in the little pond, making all kinds of little bubbles coming through. Now you can see that some of my black is bleeding into my orange a little bit because I was not very patient. I did not let my orange paint dry. So if you don't want that bleeding effect, you may want to let your orange dry before going in with a little black line. Or like I said, just do the Sharpie beforehand or after the orange is dry as well. I'm going to maybe use that black to create some dots or spots that are black as well, because the fish would or could have orange and black both on its body in different places. So have fun with it, play around with it, and see what you can do. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit that like button down below, and check out my channel, Elke Art, for more fun art tutorials. Thanks for watching.